Chocolinic, and I'm a reenactor. And the reason I mention the reenacting part, I'm dressed funny. And what I used to do for a career was 36 years in the classroom. I dressed the part by the time period we were studying. That kind of tells you I was a history teacher. And I would try to hook the kids into the subject, which was kind of hard to ignore somebody standing in front of you wearing funny clothes. I did get a lot of weird looks from my students and also some colleagues. But I also would immerse the kids in the culture of whatever we were studying by playing the music for whatever time period. And they would learn the music by checking the now playing board, which was actually very effective. And the kids handled objects, either replicas of objects from the time period or authentic stuff, if I could get a hold of it. And that allowed some of the other learning modalities to kick in because people learn in different ways. And a number of my kids realized that history wasn't as dead as the people we were studying. But I'm not in the classroom anymore. So that means I've got to repurpose myself, because I have a room full of garb at the house that's filled to capacity. I have a passion for bringing the past to life, which is why I'm involved in historical reenactment on the weekends. I have a desire to preserve landmarks which I've seen go away, so I want to document this stuff. And also playing amateur anthropologist, amateur archaeologist, and history detective. So I put this all together in this project I very pretentiously call my Mission Odyssey. And in this Odyssey, it's my personal pilgrimage. I'm visiting each of the sites of Alta California that had to do with the mission era. So that would be the missions themselves and the asistencias. Those are the spin-off missions. And the estancias, those were the ranchos. Now it's hard to find those, because a lot of them are paved over or turned into places for townhouses and condos. The presidios, those are the fortifications to protect the missions, and anything else that I can find that just happens to fit into this framework. So what I'm doing today is I am heading back to Mission San Jose because I didn't finish telling the story. I hope you stick with me on my journey. This Mission Odyssey has more than one purpose. Besides playing dress up and telling the stories of the different mission sites, and besides serving as a personal pilgrimage, there's also the opportunity to unlearn certain misconceptions that I'd been taught as a child, or admit that there were gaps in my knowledge, or to try to reconcile contradictory statements, contradictory stories. For instance, I was not really taught of Native Californian resistance to the missions. That was something that was glossed over when I was a child. And yet, for most of its existence, Mission San Jose served as a military base for punitive expeditions against hostile Indians. And that's going to be what this episode's about. Despite having more converts than any other mission in the chain, except for Mission San Luis Rey, Mission San Jose still had large groups of troublesome Indians to the east, which required constant military control. I'm in San Joaquin County near a battlefield which I can't quite get to because of fencing in the way. But it is near this spot where the story of a man begins who leads a rebellion of Native Americans against the Mexicans in Alta California. He was born with the Yokut name of Kukunuchi, and in 1821 he and his wife and children and his mother were taken to Mission San José, and it was there that Kukunuchi caught the attention of Padre Trahern, who baptized him under the name Estanislao, named for the Polish saint Stanislaus. And over the next 6 years, Estanislao became literate. He seemed to assume more of a leadership role amongst the neophytes, and he was eventually given the position of alcalde, which the Spanish and actually the Mexicans had created as, well, okay, here's a job for a neophyte, here's a position there, now you can't complain that you have no control over your lives. And he had some minor responsibilities in the position, not all that much authority, but one of the things he was responsible for was making sure that the neophytes were working kind of like a slave overseer. And one of his other responsibilities was punishments. And that may have been one of the points that triggered the rebellion that's going to take place. Now, you have to flash back a little bit. 1824, there was the Chumash Revolt, which involved 5 missions and scared the Mexican government big time in Alta California. Didn't do a lot of good for the Padres either. And here it is, 1827, Estanislao leaves the mission, and he apparently takes 400 neophytes with him. Well, later on, other neophytes start to join him, and then Chumash start joining him. And so now you have some of the Ohlone, a lot of the Yokuts, and the Chumash coming together. And at one point, Estanislao is coming across like the Alta California Spartacus. He's got like an army of 4,000 at one point. And this was causing panic amongst the Mexicans. And what ended up happening is this rebellion lasted about a year, 1828, 1829. In time, more Mexican forces are gathering because they've got to take this guy down. See, Estanislao is not just literate, he knows Spanish tactics. So he's teaching his followers to create trenches, to create palisades, to do guerrilla warfare. He was waging his own war against the Mexicans, in Alta California. One of the things that came out in a number of accounts, which I found interesting, was Estanislao used to, on occasion, use his sword to carve an S into clothing or into some object. And there's a lot of people who will look at this and go, that was the inspiration for Zorro, doing the whole Z thing with the sword. But also, one of Estanislao's followers, Yoscolo, used to wear in some situations he would wear a black hood, and some people would connect that as, that's another part of the inspiration for Zorro. And in time, the revolt is so massive that a Mariano Vallejo, he's in charge of Mexican forces. He's going to fight a pitched battle that's going to last for about 3 days, and it's in this area. It's one of the only battles where cannons were used. And eventually, Estanislao and his followers surrender. Estanislao goes to Padre Trahern. He begs his forgiveness, but he also wants forgiveness for his followers. And Padre Trahern goes to the governor and points out this would be a good thing. You could really calm a lot of stuff down if you give him and his followers pardons. And that was done in like October of 1829. And it sounds like, okay, this revolt is over. Stanislaus ends up going to the mission, returning to Mission San José, and he teaches the Yokut language there and Yokut culture, and passes in like 1834 of either measles or smallpox. That should be the end of the story. Except that what's going to happen is in the 1830s and 1840s, the Miwok and the Yokuts are making life so hellish for the Mexicans, they are conducting well-coordinated attacks and cattle raids upon the various ranchos and the missions and the mission stations, the estancias, and everyone is pleading with the army to go get these guys. And so there are Mexican expeditions at first into the Central Valley, which are very expensive and not very effective, and it's now changing the strategy of the Mexicans. Later, they are starting to think defensively. They are thinking in terms of, let's build fortifications in the passes and keep them from coming over and making trouble for us. So Estanislao served as a key figure to, spark rebellion, and that ended up growing beyond his control. When Mexico got its independence from Spain, one of the casualties of the Spanish system was to get rid of the missions as missions. They would become parish churches. The Mexican government felt that it could not afford the missions, and the idea was supposed to have been, from the very beginning anyway, to Christianize the neophytes, and then once they were felt to be ready, hand them the land. The land was supposed to be held in trust for them. Hand them the land, and they would have their own ranchos to run. And they would be good, productive Spanish citizens. Well, it wasn't quite working like that. What would end up happening is the missions would be secularized, and the vast lands of the missions would be broken up, and they would be turned into ranchos. And supposedly they were offered to the neophytes, but they either didn't want the land or they couldn't afford it, and I tend to think it was more likely the latter. And besides, the ranchos tended to be given to people who had been good, loyal followers and supporters in the revolution for independence from Spain. And this is really going to hit Mission San José hard. It's going to be the last of the missions to be secularized in 1836. But what's going to end up happening? The mission had controlled lands north up until almost Oakland, east into the Livermore Valley, and up into the Sacramento Delta. Then there's also lands around San Francisco Bay. So all of this is being broken up. And it wouldn't be padres overseeing this breakup, it would be civil administrators. Well, the civil administrator was Vallejo, and in 1840, it was reported that the conditions for the neophytes were deplorable, that there were naked, starving women and children at the missions because the food and the funding was being sent elsewhere. And to give you an idea of Vallejo's character, he had removed a bell from the mission guardhouse, and he had installed it on his ranch for personal use. So secularization is destroying the mission. The final insult would be Pio Pico, the last Mexican governor of California, sold the mission to his brother Andres. At the end of the Mexican War in 1848, Alta California was ceded to the United States. During the gold rush, the mission was converted into a place of lodging and added a general store to the south end of the mission wing. The town of Mission San José became a thriving provision center at the gateway to the southern mines. In December of 1856, the U.S. Land Commission, after courts had declared the Pio Pico sale to be fraudulent, confirmed the church, the 2 graveyards, and 2 gardens belonged to the Catholic Church. In 1858, the church and about 28 acres of land were formally returned to the church. In the 1860s, the chapel was serving as St. Joseph's Parish. A new priest, Father Federe, not liking the appearance of the buttressed walls, had the buttresses removed. But those buttresses had been installed to support the building in case of earthquake. On October 21st, 1868, the mission was largely destroyed by the Hayward earthquake. After the earthquake, Father Federe cleared the site and built a Normandy-style parish church, which served as the parish church until 1965. So how did the mission come back to life? In 1982, the frame church on the site was sold by the Catholic Archdiocese for the sum of $1 to a congregation in San Mateo across the bay. The building was cut into multiple pieces, reassembled in San Mateo, and still serves as an active church. Meanwhile, Mission San José's chapel was rebuilt between 1982 and 1985 with plans to rebuild other sections. So far, that makes it 18 missions accomplished, 7 asistencias done, 2 estancias, and we have 3 presidios out of the way, an old mission dam, and now it's on to Asistencia San Pedro y San Pablo and the hospice, which is going to be difficult to classify. I hope you stick with me on my journey.